All right. Well, thank you so much, Susie, for being here and being willing to be a part of this project. I'm so excited to have you on today in my attempt to move this project forward, which is to increase awareness and decrease stigma. So would you mind introducing yourself for our audience?
Not at all. Thank you, Molly. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm honored and humbled that you invited me. And I share your passion for this mission. I think had I known what I know now, this would have not been quite as difficult a journey for me. I'm 70 years old, and I came to this journey pretty late in life. Yeah, my story began, like many of them, when I was pretty small. I really had a pretty idyllic childhood, and there wasn't a lot of trauma, but I do recall from an early age using food, sneaking food. I remember a particular time when I was probably 4 or 5 and had a baby sister, and mother and baby sister laid down to have a nap. And that was my time to go exploring in the kitchen. And I can recall getting in a bottom drawer because I couldn't reach the upper shelves with bowls and things. But I knew I wanted a quantity of this chocolate syrup that was in the refrigerator for ice cream. So I got a little ashtray out of a bottom drawer and took it to the refrigerator, filled it with chocolate syrup, got a spoon, and ate it. And I just remember knowing that I shouldn't be doing this. I may get in trouble for this. So, either wiping out or somehow cleaning up the evidence and putting it back away and acting like nothing happened. And to this day, I don't know that my mother ever knew. I don't know if I repeated that. But there was a theme throughout my childhood of using food sometimes differently than other people did. And my family will often joke about a time when I was in probably early elementary school. I might have been 7 or 8 years old. And I remember sneaking down in the middle of the night, Christmas Eve, to my grandmother's and getting the black olives out of the refrigerator and eating them until I got sick. And my family remembers and teases me about that. And I just remember that I was always so excited when those were on the relish plate for the holidays, because they weren't something we typically had, and I liked them. So, there were just a few things like that where, we had the normal little skirmishes when I was a kid with my little sisters about the Easter candy and the, Halloween candy and the Christmas candy. I mean, there was always candy and there was always baked goods. My mother and my grandmother loved to bake. I loved to bake with them. And as I became an adolescent, that became an activity that we would do a lot, and I would do at a girlfriend's house. And, we would eat half of the cake batter or cookie batter before it would even ever hit the oven. And then the minute it came out, we were all on it too. And I never thought much of it. I thought, well, that's just what kids do, And it really wasn't until I was in my teens, about 15, 16, my family moved across the state. And it was between my 9th and 10th grade years in high school. We moved in the summer, and I didn't have any way to meet anybody. School wasn't in session. I left a boyfriend and very, very close girlfriends back in Des Moines. And I was really depressed. I was really sad. I felt really alone. I was angry that my parents moved us again. And I really fell headfirst into the food that summer. I recall that was the highlight of my day, was making great big sandwiches and chips and bowls of ice cream and just comforty stuff. And it became my daily ritual and something I really looked forward to. And it just didn't dawn on me at the time that this could be problematic. Because, I was a young kid and I was still fairly active and I wasn't putting on weight, because as a young kid, I was pretty skinny. And they used to tease me about, "What, do you have a hole in your leg?" And because I could eat quite a bit and I was kind of a skinny rail until puberty hit and until that summer. And fast forward, high school was great. I met wonderful friends and soon adjusted and, I think did the kind of normal high school stuff, like looked at what other girls were eating and how other girls looked in their clothes and started thinking about my body. And I really was not overweight at the time. But I was getting there and I was using food a lot on the weekends, just as recreation. I mean, we just would go out to the pizza places and the fast food places, and that was sort of our entertainment. Fast forward to college, and I put on more than the freshman 15. Man, I thought it was fabulous being in a dormitory where I had 24/7 access to vending machines, and the typical lunches in our dormitory cafeteria were really heavy on the carbs, and then of course that's the stuff I gravitated toward. And I think, again, because it was a period of transition where I was probably a little, not anxious, but, just had the normal, probably freshman angst, being away from home for the first time in a place where I didn't know anybody again. Because rather than stay at the university in my town, I went away to another school, still in state, but where I didn't know anyone. None of my friends were going. Most of them were staying here because we have the largest state university here in town. So again, I think the period of transition sort of prompted me into using food again to comfort myself. And then I realized, I was putting on a lot of weight, which I didn't like. And Atkins was new on the scene. This was 1970, 71. And so I remember the summer between my sophomore and or freshman and sophomore year, I went on Atkins, and I mean strict. I probably didn't even have 20 carbs a day. And lost a lot of weight fast, liked it. And I didn't know what to do with the reactions of the people around me. My boyfriend didn't like it. He kept trying to shove pizza on me and all this kind of stuff. And I remember thinking at the time, okay, the way to deal with this then is to make myself sick. I'll go eat the stuff and then I'll get rid of it. I can only remember doing that maybe a handful of times and thought, this is awful. And luckily the summer ended. I went back to school, and again, huge transition. All of a sudden, people treated me very differently than my freshman year. All of a sudden, boys who wouldn't pay any attention to me were asking me out. And young women were wanting to be my friends that hadn't given me the time of day before, and wanted to ask me about how I lost the weight, where I bought these clothes, what could they borrow. And I just remember thinking, wow, I mean, people are treating me really differently because I'm really thin. And in a way, I kind of loved that extra attention. And there was another part of me that was very confused and hurt by it. And I think that's when the whole dieting and restricting and then binging started. I was real confused, and just didn't know how to deal with it. And I just remember thinking, wow, so people don't really like me for who I am. These guys like me for how I look on their arm, or, and that, for a 19-year-old, I wasn't prepared for that. And it really bothered me. And I didn't have anybody to talk to about it, really. I just kept it all inside. And I remember that feeling stayed with me for a long time. And I think it really propelled me into all the crazy dieting, to try desperately to keep my weight down. And so I did all kinds of diets. We did crazy grapefruit, egg, and hot dog diet, or, just like one day you'd eat 9 hot dogs and the next day you'd eat 9 eggs or 9 bananas. I mean, it was insane. But it was so important to me to try to control my weight, and I didn't know how else to do it. Then my mother, I think, got wind of it, after my sophomore year, and she enrolled us into like a slim fast thing through the university here at home. They were doing a study. And so we would go and we would pick up our little 6-packs of Slim Fast and do that. And I remember just hating it and then sneaking food. So that, because my mother was doing it with me, and then I thought, well, so my mother thinks I really have a problem. And I think she was just trying to do whatever and was responding to my real focus on my weight. And that sort of continued over the years. But I still wasn't obese. I still was, a little bit overweight, but years and years and years followed of dieting, losing a bunch of weight, gaining it all back plus some, and trying every diet I knew. There were army diets. There was, I tried Weight Watchers 3 or 4 times and was very successful. Once lost 100 pounds. And then went through a painful transition in my life with a family member and gained every bit of it back plus some. So that was, my pattern was to lose a bunch of weight and then, realize I can't follow these crazy restrictive diets. And then I'd go off and just binge my little heart out, eating whatever I wanted. And I can remember a time in probably my 30s thinking, I think I have a problem with carbs. I think I'm a carb addict. And then I thought, but there really is no such thing. I didn't know. I'd never heard of sugar addiction, food addiction. I do remember buying the book Sugar Blues at some point in my late 20s or early 30s, and had heard about it or saw it on a bookstore shelf and thought, wow, interesting. And I remember reading it and thinking, oh, wow, I should stay away from that stuff. But not really. I mean, again, my weight, when I found that hadn't become a big problem, I had no other health concerns. And so I just kind of continued to diet, gain weight back, then diet, lose it, gain it back plus some. And I think at varying times I just gave up and just thought, I guess there's something wrong with me. that I just don't have any willpower. And yeah, just was kind of on that endless treadmill. And it really wasn't until in my mid 60s when I started developing problems. Had become morbidly obese. In my late 60s, I became pre-diabetic. And I kind of always joked about, I've got such great genes, which I do, thank heaven, or I probably wouldn't be here today. But I kept thinking to myself, how long can you cheat this? How long? And, I had a grandson by that time and was starting to think more about, I've got to figure this out. I've got to learn how to take care of myself. And, I kept still thinking I'm going to find the perfect diet. And I would research diets and I would talk about diets with my friends. And I can even remember one of my friends saying, maybe you should just quit talking about it and just do something. It's like, oh, you mean researching them doesn't really help? And it really wasn't, honestly, until the pandemic, when I was locked at home and I was really starting to look at the way I was eating. And my fitness and wellness center, the owner taught a class about whole food, plant-based eating. And I've always been more plant forward. I've never really enjoyed eating meat. And I've had periods of time in my life where I was a vegetarian. And so I was really curious about that type of eating and thought, but I'm going to have to change my whole way of cooking because I'm married to a carnivore. And, how's this going to work? And I remember asking the woman that owns my wellness center, how did you learn to cook like this? I mean, was it books or what? And she told me about a chef that she met on a cruise, and it was Chef AJ. And I, during the pandemic, started tuning in because she decided she was going to interview experts all the time about areas of eating healthy, losing weight. And I knew that she had lost some 50 pounds. And it was on her show that I first heard the term food addict. And she interviewed Vera Tarman. And I got teary. I all of a sudden heard my story. I heard things that made so much sense to me. And I immediately ordered Food Junkie's book because Vera had talked about her book, talked about her own experience and that of some of her patients. And for the next probably 6 months, I thought about it. I joined her Facebook page. I read it religiously. I listened to people talk and, share their stories, and read the book a couple times and thought, yeah, this is me, but I don't know if I can do this. And I was so focused on the piece about never having sugar again, and thought, I don't know how anybody does that. That just seemed like it was not something I could ever do. And I realized I had a lot of stories. You're 69 years old, you're too overweight, you're too far gone, you've lived too long like this, you're just going to be fat. And I don't know what changed for me. But all of a sudden I thought, you know what? I've got to give this a try. I've got to do what she says. I've got to approach this differently than anything else. It's not a diet. I've got to give this a try. So I set January 4th of 2021 as my date that I was going to be done. Got through the holidays, cleared out the house, because I'd heard Dr. Vera say, and I'd heard Chef AJ, who I had followed over these months, say, if it's in the house, it's in your mouth. And I thought, yeah, that's something I haven't tried. I haven't tried never having it in the house in the first place. So I sat down with my husband and I just said, here's the deal. I listened to this. I've decided that I am a food addict. I have to learn how to live without sugar. I'm going to give it up. And, bless his heart, he'd watched me over 38 years go on lots of diets and lose that 100 pounds on Weight Watchers, which he did too. Well, not quite that much, but he got to lifetime on Weight Watchers. And so he'd seen me go up and down, and he had expressed concern to me, before I started on this journey, that he was very worried about my health. And I heard him, and it wasn't enough to make me really change my ways. I think it was just finally seeing the story of enough people that looked like mine that had found freedom from compulsive eating and, just that absolute craziness around sugar. That once we start, we just can't stop. And everything I'd learned all my life, and all my doctors had talked to me about, eat less, move more, everything in moderation. Well, that never worked for me. And I thought it was just me, that I was just weak-willed. And then understanding and reading these stories and hearing the experts talk about sugar addiction as a powerful addiction like alcohol or nicotine or any of the behavior, gambling, sex, whatever, that they're very real, and that our brains are hijacked and get rewired and going in search of dopamine. And when I look at it, I realize when I was at the end of my rope, when I was setting a date, I couldn't get enough. There wasn't enough in the house. I couldn't drive and get enough. I was driving through fast food places and donut places and, eating in my car, because there just wasn't enough in the house to even get that comfort or high, that dopamine hit anymore. And I went, that scared me. The realization about how progressive this had become, I think, is part of what frightened me into thinking, I have to do this differently than I've ever done before. And so I did. I, in the beginning, those first 6 months, I was fortunate in that, I believe, because it was the pandemic, we weren't socializing, we weren't entertaining, we weren't going out to restaurants. So I wasn't tempted. And my husband agreed to not bring any of the sugary, floury stuff into the house. And so there was really no way for me to get it. We weren't going even into the grocery stores. We were ordering our groceries online and driving and picking them up in the parking lot. And I realized, okay, this is a good opportunity to do this. And what am I going to do that's completely different than what I've ever done before? And one of the things was, alcohol too. Because on Weight Watchers, I had always over the years carefully, calculated so that I had enough points to have my wine or whatever at night. And I decided, okay, I'm going to try this. And it was January. So a lot of people were doing dry January. And I thought, I'll just do the dry January thing and see how that goes. because I'd heard Vera say that it can keep your cravings alive. And I was pretty sure from listening to other people that my cravings were going to be off the charts, because I had gotten to the point where I was eating so much sugar every day and highly ultra processed, the drive-through food, that I thought, this isn't going to be fun. And I don't really want to prolong it. So long story short, I decided to do the alcohol thing too for 30 days. But I thought, I need something. So I brought in Diet Coke, thinking I've got to have something at night when my husband's sitting here drinking red wine. And if I want some, I can have a Diet Coke. Well, that lasted about 2 or 3 weeks. And I quickly realized, oh, artificial sweeteners have got to go. My brain lit up so much on those Diet Cokes, and I was craving them then, and was soon wanting 2, 3, 4 a day. And so I finally just realized, okay, I gotta get off of that too. And I knew that there was more to it than the food. I mean, the food was my focus in the beginning, but I knew somewhere in the back of my mind, there's more to this than the food. But I focused on just getting the food under control. And, it's when I reached out to you, Molly. I knew I had to consult with somebody that really understood active addiction and food addiction and wouldn't poo-poo it. My doctor didn't understand, she just wanted me to move more and eat less. And, she did say eat less carbs, but without an understanding of the fact that I am an addict, and moderation is not, it's just not doable for me. And it took me a lot of years to figure that out. But I'm so grateful that I did. And the other piece that was really key for me in the beginning was just educating myself, just listening and reading and joining every kick sugar, quit sugar summit that there was. And it also kept me in line, so to speak, because it was top of mind. I was constantly reading and listening about food addiction, talking about food addiction. Realized I needed to actively participate in the Facebook group, which I did. And then quickly got involved in online Zoom groups with other addicts. And that's really made all the difference for me. I think just the realization, this is a real thing. Many other people have this same addiction, and there is hope. I could see people who'd been doing this longer than I am that gave me the hope to continue. Yeah, I'm sugar sober to this day. Woo-hoo. And very grateful for it.
Yeah. So you talked about, you took us through your whole story. You talked about how the beginning of the recovery journey felt, and, and like finding the community, the connection, the hope. But I know, just because you and I do have that personal relationship now, I know that there were some difficult times along the way, and I expect there will be more, right? Because that's life. But I'm wondering, when you hit that post-acute withdrawal stage, what did you do, or how did you find it in you to dig deep and keep going? Can you kind of talk a bit about that and what you did to overcome that period?
Yes. Well, talking to you, I didn't even know there was such a thing as post-acute withdrawal. But when all of a sudden, things had been going along pretty smoothly, I'd gotten through the horrible, first few days, couple weeks of the detox and withdrawal, the headaches, the wanting to sleep all the time. And then things were just really sailing along pretty well. Again, we were still kind of sequestered, So we weren't going out a lot, although we were starting to get together with our children for a special holiday or something. And yeah, it was really tough the first couple times when I was about 6 months in, and we'd have these family gatherings, and there would just be all this food that I don't eat. And in fact, one of the very first times, my daughter-in-law asked me to bring this cake that I used to make. And I was so taken aback and just said, well, no, I don't have a cake mix in my house, and no. And she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I totally forgot. So my family was so used to me being into the sugar and always bringing sugar and having sugar. And so it was kind of weird. And my post-acute withdrawal, which I learned about then, kind of hit at about that same time, that all of a sudden now I'm being exposed to a few more things, triggers, and all of a sudden it doesn't feel like it's going quite as smoothly. And my sleep started getting a little funky. And I remember thinking, I wasn't thinking very clearly. Again, I was experiencing some brain fog, which had been such a great thing to be rid of when I got through the detox, which I wasn't expecting. I didn't know really what to expect, other than after I get through that initial phase, I probably won't have the cravings so badly. But I was so happy to have the clear brain and more energy. So all of a sudden, when post-acute withdrawal hit, and now my energy's tanking, my mood, I'm like real up and down. My mood, I was finding myself getting real irritable. And I remember talking to you saying, I don't know what's wrong. I was doing so well. And I think, that was a huge part of it for me, realizing this is a real phenomenon. This is when it hits. These are some of the things that you can expect. And I remember thinking, okay, what do I need to do? And I started doing some daily things, more meditation, more reading, having time alone in the mornings in front of my light. I have seasonal affective disorder, so I sit in front of a light more days of the year than not. And I started using that time to do daily readers or read something out of, some of the books that I had purchased or borrowed, and really kind of dug in and just said, this too shall pass. I know you helped me to understand that this is transient, this is expected. And I think just knowing that made me empowered. And I did start, reaching out and having conversations outside of groups with other addicts, which really helped me a lot. And I didn't realize how important that was going to be, that connection, and how key that would be for me to keeping on. I also, and I remember having a conversation with you about this, Molly, I also had to get a little less obsessive or compulsive about my my food and the reading stuff. I mean, because it came to a point where I was so focused on food addiction that it became my entire world. And I had to actively try to read things for pleasure, to do things for pleasure, to go and be outside. I remember that first summer when I was 6 months in, being outside a lot really helped me, focusing in the moment on beauty. I started taking pictures of things in nature because it just gave me something else to focus on and take delight and joy in. I I started practicing gratitude again, which really helped me a lot. I had done it years ago with a group of women from a fellowship I was in and book club, and we started sending each other gratitudes, and it kind of fell off over the years. And I realized during the post-acute withdrawal that that was something I could add back in that would really serve me. Because, even though I was through with the cravings, the horrible cravings, I still had stuff that was coming up. And I soon realized this is more about learning a new way of being with my emotions and moods than anything else. That it's really important for me now to develop habits to take the place of the hand to mouth, comfort that, I'm going to need to learn to be uncomfortable. And oh man, I didn't like that part. I really wanted to just slide through that part. I wanted to avoid that piece. And I would listen to people talk and soon would learn from my own experience. The only way out is in. I mean, you got it. And so I would practice sitting with whatever was bothering me without turning on music, without turning on the TV, without getting on my phone, and just sit with it. Oh, and I remember tears just streaming the first few times I did it because it was so uncomfortable. And I thought, wow, to get to this stage of life and not have had much experience in just sitting with big emotions. Wow. So, I mean, I felt like a bit like a baby at that time, having to learn how to soothe myself without my pacifier, without my food and drink. And it right now it sounds sort of silly to say that, but I remember at the time thinking, this is the difference between abstinence and recovery. This piece is the recovery. I've got the abstinence figured out. Now I got to do the hard work of recovery, of learning how to live a different life that doesn't center around food and doesn't center around pushing emotions down or silencing them. I also got pretty good, more practiced, I'll say, at making requests of the people around me. That has never been an easy thing for me. I've always been a person that I'm the oldest child. I've always been a person that prided myself in being able to do stuff on my own, figure it out. And I had an interesting story that if I had to ask for something of people that I loved, they really weren't paying attention. And so I'd sort of lived in this place of resentment because nobody was living up to my expectations, which, by the way, I hadn't, verbalized to anyone. And so I had to do a lot of personal work with learning how to say no to things like making the cakes to bring to the family functions, going to the store. There were just things I had to change, and I had to make requests. One of the requests I had to make, and I really had to get serious with this about during post-acute withdrawal, I realized I was so tired, and at night I was getting triggered because I was so tired, and I'm in the kitchen trying to make something to eat. And I finally had to say to my husband, nighttime is not a good time for me to be in the kitchen. And I really need you to step up. I mean, I can help have things, I'll choose things. And but he was so good. I taught him how to read labels, and he knew exactly what to look for and all the, hidden names for sugar. And because he was doing all our Costco runs. To this day, I haven't been in Costco for probably over 3 years. I still don't go in the grocery store. It's not a safe place for me. I think I would do okay. I've experimented a little bit over the last few months with going into Trader Joe's or something, a small store where I know kind of exactly where everything is and I know what areas I need to avoid. But I got better at realizing these are things I need to put in place, and I need to let people know, and I need to ask for what I need. The other piece was the whole diet culture, and I had to learn to tell people that I'm not on a diet. I'm not weighing myself. I had to get used to the fact that I was not going to weigh myself, that I was not going to know. And I made the deal that I would only weigh at my doctor's office, and I only go there every 6 months. So that was really a shift. I was afraid about that. I was so afraid the first time I was going to the doctor. And I remember talking to you about it. And it was like, well, you can say I don't want to be weighed. And it was like, you can't. Or you can turn around, or you can do this, and yeah, it was just like such a revelation to me that I could ask for what I need, or say that doesn't work for me, or yes, I will do that. And I'll decide if I want to know or not. And it was so hard, but yet it was so freeing the first couple times I did it. The other thing about the piece about post-acute withdrawal was about the same time I was going through that, I decided I needed to get more active. I'd kind of built up my energy. I knew I'd lost some weight. I was feeling better. And I made a commitment to do some strength training. And I had to go in for an evaluation before I started with this personal trainer at my wellness center. And part of it was going to be weighing me. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do? How do I deal with this? And I remember talking to you about it, Molly, and thinking, okay, I just need to tell her, this is my deal. This is my story. It's not helpful for me to weigh because it sets me up on this whole diet journey that I've been on all my life that never worked. And I've got to keep the focus on eating for abstinence and health and not weight loss. And so I told her that, and she's like, okay, we don't have to weigh you. We'll do all the physical things and see how many times I can get up and down and how far I can reach, my toes and all the analytics she needed to do. But the weighing piece, she agreed to just let that go. I said, I'm doing that with my doctor, and I am to this day. I get weighed every 6 months at my doctor's office, and that's it. And that's been really helpful for me. And I'm not going to lie, there are times when I look and think, oh, I should change my food plan, or, oh, I should, and it's like, where'd that come from? And it's usually about weight. It's usually like, oh, I'd like to drop some more weight a little faster. And yeah, it's not because I'm bored with my food or because I think something's, setting me off. It's none of that. If I really get honest, it's because I want to lose more weight and do it quickly, which we all know doesn't work. But I still will go there from time to time. And that's okay. I mean, stuff's going to come up that's probably going to trigger me, and stuff's going to come up that's that old diet mentality. But the difference is now with my, I guess almost 20 months of recovery, is that I recognize it now for what it is usually, or I know, why what's going on with you? And then I know I can call you and do a check-in like we did a couple of weeks ago, because it was like, I'm thinking about changing my food plan. And it's like, why? And so I guess, yeah, in the beginning, I thought, oh, I'm just not going to go there anymore. Well, yeah, we're always going to go there. I mean, I had nearly 7 decades of practice at
That's
that way
right.
of being.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So rewiring new pathway or rewiring the brain or creating new pathways, there's going to be rebound. There's going to be snapback. You're human, right? We're not going to show up and shame you or anything like that. But when that weight loss becomes primary goal, right? That noise just starts all over again. And now it's like any other diet we've been. I mean, you talked about all those different diets you'd been on in the beginning and how you could do them for a period of time, but then like there would be this episode, like something would happen and all of a sudden you're like, I can't do this anymore, not for one more second, right? And in order to make this a program of recovery, you're figuring out like, oh, it's not just about the food, it's about these other things. And so we had heard in the beginning, like these ups, downs all over the place, like body, thinking about body a lot, thinking about weight a lot, thinking about food a lot, talked about going through your recovery journey, even when it got hard through the post-acute withdrawal stage. And I'm really wondering, and even talking about like all the things you do, being in front of your light and meetings and reading books and listening to podcasts or YouTube or whatever it is that you're doing. And I'm really wondering, can you talk a little bit about what life is like today? You're fully immersed in this recovery. And I'm not saying like anybody's perfect in it, but thinking back to what it was like the first 6 decades or more, right? And what is it like today in the last almost 2, I mean, we're coming up on 2 years soon. What has life been like now?
wow, there's such a difference in my mental attitude, that to be rid of the constant obsession, to be rid of the constant criticism in my head. You're a failure. You can't do this. You fat slob. What the hell's wrong with you? You have no willpower. That was a constant loop in my head. And just the freedom of not having that constant, and then the thoughts about food and when am I going to get my next food and what can I make now and what can I eat now, and finding myself in the pantry thinking, I don't even remember how I got here. What am I doing? What am I looking for? I don't have any of that today. And it's almost kind of unbelievable to me. If somebody had said to me a couple years ago, oh yeah, you won't even think about chocolate anymore or want it or go looking for it or find yourself in the pantry, I would have said, you're crazy. That won't happen for me. That might happen for you, but that won't ever happen for me. And it has happened for me. I really don't think about those foods very much at all anymore. And I just feel like I have so much more mental capacity for joy and being in the moment and really experiencing my life without this sort of cloudy, awful haze of addiction, without constantly thinking about where I'm going to get my next fix. It's just not an issue. It's not in our house. I don't go to places. I had to do some real self-binding, thinking about Anna Lemke's book. And, when I first heard her on the Food Junkies podcast, I couldn't wait to get her book. And that's been really helpful for me. And some of the self-binding, like I just made a rule, no eating in your car, because drive-throughs were full of crap and hidden sugars. And even the healthy places I was going to get my soup, I found out, once I learned how to get on their website and look at stuff, we're loaded with sugars and things. So now that's just off the table. Once in a while, we'll still be in a social situation. We had one here a couple of weeks ago where we went to a private party for a birthday in a room in a restaurant, and there were probably 18 of us, and I was probably the only one in the room that wasn't drinking. And I've gotten real used to that. I have my club soda with lime, and that's all good. And then the birthday cake came out. I'd been able to order off the menu. That's a lovely thing I've learned how to do is, on the rare occasions we do go out, look at the menu ahead of time online, decide what I'm going to have before I get there. I had done that night. I knew I was going to order salmon and green beans, and that I would be satiated from that because I know better than to let myself get hungry. But here was the big, slice or slab of cake on my husband's plate next to me. And I just remember thinking, oh, wow, looks really good. Maybe I could have a little taste of that. And then I went, no, you can't. No, that hasn't changed. If I were to have one bite of that, I would want the whole rest of the cake. I would be sitting there thinking about how can I get more? How can I get more? And, it was fleeting. And when it first came up and I first looked at it and I started having the thoughts, I thought, oh God, and I thought it was going to ruin the whole night. It was going to take me down. And it didn't. It was really fleeting. And so that is so comforting to me to know that, yeah, this stuff's still going to come up when it's, you're faced with it and you're not accustomed to it. And it's just a thought, and I don't have to act on it. All it is a thought. And I've just learned in my recovery not to give those thoughts any power and to not act on them. That it's a thought, just watch it float by like a cloud, and go, okay, well, and it's really helped me a lot. I say to myself, that's not your food. And just the comfort in knowing, yeah, no, that's not my food. That's not something I eat any longer. It is, that's the gold in this. That and watching my relationships grow and change and get healthier, because I'm not obsessed with the food. I'm not in the food and in a fog, or I'm not, thinking about the next fix or where am I going to go? How am I going to get it? And that sort of frantic preoccupation just leaves a lot of space for me to be more with people and present and happy. My moods aren't nearly as erratic as they used to be. With the sugar, I'm sure, because my blood sugars, I'm sure, were all over the place. The other piece that's fabulous is I've gotten so much stronger now. I've been doing this strength training for over a year, and I move better. I feel better. I can do things that I couldn't do before. It had gotten to the point where, late in my addiction, I could hardly stand in the kitchen to prepare a meal. I had to sit. I couldn't stand that long. And it's hard to remember that. But once in a while I'll catch myself, just doing a lot of things and standing in the kitchen for a long time and think, wow, 2 years ago, you couldn't have done this. Or doing things with my grandkids, that like 2 years ago, I wouldn't have dared get down on the floor because I didn't know if I could get myself back up, without help. And talk about embarrassment. So that's the other piece. I think being free of all the shame, because there was so much shame, and I didn't even realize it. That shame was a huge piece about the way I felt and the way I looked, and the fact that I was pre-diabetic. And, it's like, how could I do this to myself? And now, I've reversed that. Now my chart says I have a history of prediabetes, but that it's resolved. I've lowered my A1C, my hemoglobin, my blood pressure, my weight. I mean, I've done so many wonderful things to ensure a happier, longer life. And yeah, it was just admitting I have an addiction, figuring out what my triggers are, and saying, I'm done with them. I'm leaving that behind. And and it's still evolving. I mean, there are still probably things that I may eventually decide I have to give up.
Sure.
I skirt the whole flower thing a little, and but I don't get worried about it. I know friends of mine in recovery that I talk to that have been doing this a lot longer than I have share with me how their food plans evolve over time, and I'm real comfortable with that.
Yeah.
You know,
Nice
so
and easy.
it's fun to just feel comfortable in my own skin.
Yeah.
To not walk into every room thinking, am I the fattest person in the room? Is everybody looking at me? What do I have anything to wear to this event or whatever? I don't even have those thoughts anymore. So yeah, the mental freedom is just beyond anything I really anticipated.
So let me ask you this. This is my final question for you then. Thinking about this journey that you've been on your entire life. I mean, we all have been, right?
Yeah.
Life is a journey. What did you need to hear when you were first starting this leg of the journey? If you think back 2 years ago, maybe even longer, what did you need to hear then that maybe you'd be willing to share with folks who are listening in and maybe contemplating starting this journey or are newly on it?
I think one of the biggest things that helped me in the beginning was hearing, it's not your fault. It's not that you're weak-willed or immoral or crazy or whatever, that you have a brain disorder. You have a brain that's wired differently, through my use and abuse. I had developed an outlandish addiction. I mean, late stage addiction. And it's okay. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't a personal weakness. It's an addiction, and there is hope and there is help. And I think that's probably the biggest thing, is just getting rid of the guilt and shame and saying, there are many of us out here that are fighting this battle, that have these brains that are specially wired. And it's not the curse that you believe it is. It feels like it in the beginning, but I have gained so many friends and so much knowledge, self-knowledge and knowledge of the world and things that work for addiction and don't, through this journey, that I just never dreamed I would learn and experience and develop friends with people all over the world. There's hope. You're not alone. You can do this, and you can do it one day at a time with connection with other addicts. I mean, that I think is the piece that really saved me was finally deciding you don't have to do this alone. You can do this with help and with education and support, and you don't have to struggle through in silence by yourself. Because there are very few of us, I think, that can honestly say we can do this alone. And that was a hard one for me, I'll admit. In the beginning, I didn't necessarily really want to share. And I made myself do it. Because I realized I process things auditorially. I process things when I'm speaking and I'm hearing them aloud. And that's why connection with groups and other addicts is just so vital. So yeah, it's not a personal failure, and you don't have to do it alone. And you'll find a group of people. If you search, you'll find the right group of people that love you just the way you are and completely understand what it is you're going through. There really is hope and a fantastic life on the other side. Once you can get through the withdrawal and the addiction. Well, we don't ever get through the addiction, but the acute withdrawal and just learning to live your life differently without the focus of food, that it's really possible. And it's not as hard as I thought it was going to be. That's the other piece I wish I'd known, because I suffered for months getting ready to do this, thinking this is not going to work for me. This works for everybody else, but it's not going to work for me. I'm too fat. I'm too old. I've waited too long. My blood pressure's too high. My weight's too high. None of that's true. It can work for any one of us. We just have to stick with it long enough to experience the miracle. And I'm so grateful that I did, and that I could finally hear the truth that this is an addiction, plain and simple.
Amen to that. Oh, thank you so much for being willing to be here, Susie, and share your story. I think that your message will be heard loud and clear. And I think many people, in fact, I think will resonate with it and maybe take the steps needed to get the help that they deserve. So I appreciate you so very much.
Thank you. That's my hope, that it'll help. That's my passion, like yours, to reduce the stigma and offer help and hope to people that feel hopeless, because I was in that spot and never dreamed I could be where I am today. So thank you, Molly.